Chapter 1 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Siddharth. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, translated by Charles Johnston. Introduction to Book 1. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are in themselves exceedingly brief, less than 10 pages of large type in the original, yet they contain the essence of practical wisdom set forth in admirable order and detail. The theme, if the present interpreter be right, is the great regeneration, the birth of the spiritual from the psychical man. The same theme which Paul so wisely and eloquently set forth in writing to his disciples in Corinth, the theme of all mystics in all lands. We think of ourselves as living a purely physical life in these material bodies of ours. In reality, we have gone far indeed from pure physical life. For ages, our life has been psychical. We have been centered and immersed in the psychic nature. Some of the schools of India say that psychic nature is, as it were, a looking glass, wherein are mirrored the things seen by the physical eyes and heard by the physical ears. But this is a magic mirror. The images remain and take a certain life of their own. Thus, within the psychic realm of our life, there grows up an imaged world wherein we dwell, a world of images, of things seen and heard, and therefore a world of memories, a world also of hopes and desires, of fears and regrets. Mental life grows up among these images, built on a measuring and comparing, on the massing of images together into general ideas, on the abstraction of new notions and images from these, till a new world is built up within, full of desires and hates, ambition, envy, longing, speculation, curiosity, self-will, self-interest. The teaching of the East is that all these are true powers overlaid by false desires, that though in manifestation psychical, they are in essence spiritual, that the psychical man is the wheel and prophecy of the spiritual man. The purpose of life, therefore, is the realizing of that prophecy, the unveiling of the immortal man, the birth of the spiritual from the psychical, whereby we enter our divine inheritance and come to inhabit eternity. This is indeed salvation, the purpose of all true religion in all times. Patanjali has in mind the spiritual man to be born from the psychical. His purpose is to set in order the practical means for the unveiling and regeneration, and to indicate the fruit, the glory, and the power of that new birth. Through the sutras of the first book, Patanjali is concerned with the first great problem, the emergence of the spiritual man from the wheels and meshes of the psychic nature, the moods and vestures of the mental and emotional man. Later will come the consideration of the nature and powers of the spiritual man, once he stands clear of the psychic wheels and trammels, and a view of the realms in which these new spiritual powers are to be revealed. At this point may come a word of explanation. I have been asked why I use the word sutras for these rules of Patanjali's system, when the word aphorism has been connected with them in our minds for a generation. The reason is, the name aphorism suggests, to me at least, a pithy sentence of very general application, a piece of proverbial wisdom that may be quoted in a good many sets of circumstances, and which will almost bear on its face the evidence of its truth. But with the sutra, the case is different. It comes from the same root as the word su and means indeed a thread, suggesting therefore a close-knit, consecutive chain of argument. Not only has each sutra a different place in the system, but further, taken out of this place, it will be almost meaningless, and will by no means be self-evident. So I have thought best to adhere to the original word. The Sutras of Patanjali are as closely knit together, as dependent on each other, as the propositions of Euclid, and can no more be taken out of their proper setting. In the second part of the first book, the problem of the emergence of the spiritual man is further dealt with. We are led to the consideration of the barriers to his emergence, of the overcoming of the barriers, and of certain steps and stages in the ascent from the ordinary consciousness of practical life to the finer, deeper, radiant consciousness of the spiritual man. End of Introduction to Book 1.
Chapter 2 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read for you by Chiquito Craster. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Translated by Charles Johnston. Chapter 2. Book 1. 1. Om. Here follows instruction in union. Union, here as always in the scriptures of India, means union of the individual soul with the oversoul, of the personal consciousness with the divine consciousness, whereby the mortal becomes immortal and enters the eternal. Therefore, salvation is, first, freedom from sin and the sorrow which comes from sin, and then a divine and eternal well-being, wherein the soul partakes of the being, the wisdom and glory of God. 2. Union, spiritual consciousness, is gained through control of the versatile psychic nature. The goal is the full consciousness of the spiritual man, illumined by the divine light. Nothing except the obdurate resistance of the psychic nature keeps us back from the goal. The psychical powers are spiritual powers run wild, perverted, drawn from their proper channel. Therefore, our first task is to regain control of this perverted nature, to chasten, purify, and restore the misplaced powers. 3. Then the seer comes to consciousness in his proper nature. Egotism is but the perversion of spiritual being. Ambition is the inversion of spiritual power. Passion is the distortion of love. The mortal is the limitation of the immortal. When the false images give place to true, then the spiritual man stands forth luminous as the sun when the clouds disperse. 4. Heretofore, the seer has been enmeshed in the activities of the psychic nature. The power and life which are the heritage of the spiritual man have been caught and enmeshed in psychical activities. Instead of pure being in the divine, there have been fretful, combative egotism, its hand against every man. Instead of the light of pure vision, there have been restless senses, have been and imaginings. Instead of spiritual joy, the undivided joy of pure being, there has been self-indulgence of body and mind. These are all real forces, but distorted from their true nature and goal. They must be extricated, like gems from the matrix, like the pith from the reed, steadily, without destructive violence. Spiritual powers are to be drawn forth from the psychic meshes. 5. The psychic activities are 5. They are either subject or not subject to the 5 hindrances. Book 2, 3. The psychic nature is built up through the image-making power, the power which lies behind and dwells in mind pictures. These pictures do not remain quiescent in the mind. They are kinetic, restless, stimulating to new acts. Thus the mind image of an indulgence suggests and invites to a new indulgence. The picture of past joy is framed in regrets or hopes, and there is the ceaseless play of the desire to know, to penetrate to the essence of things, to classify. This too busies itself ceaselessly with the mind images, so that we may classify the activities of the psychic nature thus. 6. These activities are sound intellection, unsound intellection, predication, sleep, memory. We have here a list of mental and emotional powers, of powers that picture and observe, and of powers that picture and feel. But the power to know and feel is spiritual and immortal. What is needed is not to destroy it, but to raise it from the psychical to the spiritual realm. 7. The elements of sound intellection are direct observation, inductive reason, and trustworthy testimony. Each of these is a spiritual power, thinly veiled. Direct observation is the outermost form of the soul's pure vision. Inductive reason rests on the great principles of continuity and correspondence, and these on the supreme truth that all life is of the One. Trustworthy testimony, the sharing of one soul in the wisdom of another, rests on the ultimate oneness of all souls. 8. Unsound intellection is false understanding, not resting on a perception of the true nature of things. When the object is not truly perceived, when the observation is inaccurate and faulty, thought or reasoning based on that mistaken perception is of necessity false and unsound. 9. Predication is carried on through words or thoughts not resting on an object perceived. The purpose of this sutra is to distinguish between the mental process of predication and observation, induction or testimony. Predication is the attribution of a quality or action to a subject by adding to it a predicate. In the sentence, the man is wise, the man is the subject, is wise is the predicate. This may be simply an interplay of thoughts without the presence of the object thought of, or the things thought of may be imaginary or unreal, while observation, induction and testimony always go back to an object. 10. Sleep is a psychic condition which rests on mind states, all material things being absent. In waking life, we have two currents of perception, an outer current of physical things seen and heard and perceived, an inner current of mind images and thoughts. The outer current ceases in sleep, the inner current continues, and watching the mind images float before the field of consciousness, we dream. Even when there are no dreams, there is still a certain consciousness in sleep, so that on waking, one says, I have slept well, or I have slept badly. 11. Memory is holding to mind images of things perceived without modifying them. Here as before, the mental power is explained in terms of mind images, which are the material of which the psychic world is built. Therefore, the sages teach that the world of our perception, which is indeed a world of mind images, is but the wraith or shadow of the real and everlasting world. In this sense, memory is but the psychical inversion of the spiritual, ever-present vision. That which is ever before the spiritual eye of the seer needs not to be remembered. 12. The control of these psychic activities comes through the right use of the will, and through ceasing from self-indulgence. If these psychical powers and energies, even such evil things as passion and hate and fear, are but spiritual powers fallen and perverted, how are we to bring about their release and restoration? Two means are presented to us: the awakening of the spiritual will, and the purification of mind and thought. 13. The right use of the will is a steady effort to stand in spiritual being. We have thought of ourselves perhaps as creatures moving upon this earth, rather helpless, at the mercy of storm and hunger and our enemies. we are to think of ourselves as immortals, dwelling in the light, encompassed and sustained by spiritual powers. The steady effort to hold this thought will awaken dormant and unrealized powers, which will unveil to us the nearness of the eternal. 14. This becomes a firm resting place when followed long, persistently, with earnestness. We must seek spiritual life in conformity with the laws of spiritual life, with earnestness, humility, gentle charity, which is an acknowledgment of the one soul within us all. Only through obedience to that shared life, through perceptual remembrance of our oneness with all divine being, our nothingness apart from divine being, can we enter our inheritance. 15. Ceasing from self-indulgence is conscious mastery over the thirst for sensuous pleasure here or hereafter. Rightly understood, the desire for sensation is the desire of being, the distortion of the soul's eternal life. The lust of sensual stimulus and excitation rests on the longing to feel one's life keenly, to gain the sense of being really alive. This sense of true life comes only with the coming of the soul, and the soul comes only in silence, after self-indulgence has been courageously and loyally stilled through reverence before the coming soul. 16. The consummation of this is freedom from thirst for any mode of psychical activity, through the establishment of the spiritual man. In order to gain a true understanding of this teaching, study must be supplemented by devoted practice, faith by works. The reading of the words will not avail. There must be a real effort to stand as the soul, a real ceasing from self-indulgence. With this awakening of the spiritual will and purification will come at once the growth of the spiritual man and our awakening consciousness as the spiritual man. And this, attained in even a small degree, will help us notably in our contest. To him that hath shall be given. 17. Meditation with an object follows these stages. First, exterior examining, then interior judicial action, then joy, then realization of individual being. In the practice of meditation, a beginning may be made by fixing the attention upon some external object, such as a sacred image or picture, or a part of a book of devotion. In the second stage, one passes from the outer object to an inner pondering upon its lessons. The third stage is the inspiration, the heightening of the spiritual will, which results from this pondering. The fourth stage is the realization of one's spiritual being, as enkindled by this meditation. 18. After the exercise of the will has stilled the psychic activities, meditation rests only on the fruit of former meditations. In virtue of continued practice and effort, the need of an external object on which to rest the meditation is outgrown. An interior state of spiritual consciousness is reached, which is called the cloud of things knowable. Book 4, 29. 19. Subjective consciousness arising from a natural cause is possessed by those who have laid aside their bodies and been absorbed into subjective nature. Those who have died, entered the paradise between births, are in a condition resembling meditation without an external object. But in the fullness of time, the seeds of desire in them will spring up, and they will be born again into this world. 20. For the others, there is spiritual consciousness led up to by faith, valor, right mindfulness, one-pointedness, perception. It is well to keep in mind these steps on the path to illumination: faith, valor, right mindfulness, one-pointedness, perception. Not one can be dispensed with. All must be one. First faith, and then from faith, valor. From valor, right mindfulness. From right mindfulness, a one-pointed aspiration toward the soul. From this, perception, and finally, full vision as the soul. 21. Spiritual consciousness is nearest to those of keen, intense will. The image used in the swift impetus of the torrent. The kingdom must be taken by force. Firm will come only through effort. Effort is inspired by faith. The secret is this: it is not enough to have intuitions. We must act on them. We must live them. 22. The will may be weak, or of middle strength, or intense. Therefore, there is a spiritual consciousness higher than this. For those of weak will, there is this counsel: to be faithful in obedience, to live the life, and thus to strengthen the will to more perfect obedience. The will is not ours, but God's, and we come into it only through obedience. As we enter into the Spirit of God, we are permitted to share the power of God. Higher than the three stages of the way is the goal, the end of the way. 23. Or spiritual consciousness may be gained by ardent service of the Master. If we think of our lives as tasks laid on us by the Master of life, if we look on all duties as parts of that Master's work, entrusted to us and forming our life work, then, if we obey promptly, loyally, sincerely, we shall enter by degrees into the Master's life and share the Master's power. Thus we shall be initiated into the spiritual will. 24. The Master is the spiritual man, who is free from hindrances, bondage to works, and the fruition and seed of works. The soul of the Master, the Lord, is of the same nature as the soul in us, but we still bear the burden of many evils. We are in bondage through our former works. We are under the dominance of sorrow. The soul of the Master is free from sin and servitude and sorrow. 25. In the Master is the perfect seed of omniscience. The soul of the Master is in essence one with the Oversoul, and therefore partaker of the Oversoul's all wisdom and all power. All spiritual attainment rests on this, and is possible because the Soul and the Oversoul are one. 26. He is the teacher of all who have gone before, since he is not limited by time. From the beginning, the Oversoul has been the teacher of all souls, which by their entrance into the Oversoul, by realizing their oneness with the Oversoul, have inherited the kingdom of the light. For the Oversoul is before time, and time, father of all else, is one of his children. 27. His word is Om. Om, the symbol of the three in one, the three worlds in the soul, the three times, past, present, future, in eternity, the three divine powers, creation, preservation, transformation, in the one being, the three essences, immortality, omniscience, joy, in the one Spirit. This is the word, the symbol, of the Master and Lord, the perfected spiritual man. 28. Let there be soundless repetition of Om, and meditation thereon. This has many meanings, in ascending degrees. There is, first, the potency of the word itself, as of all words. Then there is the manifold significance of the symbol, as suggested above. Lastly, there is the spiritual realization of the high essences thus symbolized. Thus we rise, step by step, to the eternal. 29. Thence come the awakening of interior consciousness and the removal of barriers. Here again faith must be supplemented by works. The life must be led as well as studied, before the full meaning can be understood. The awakening of spiritual consciousness can only be understood in measure as it is entered. It can only be entered where the conditions are present: purity of heart and strong aspiration, and the resolute conquest of each sin. This, however, may easily be understood, that the recognition of the three worlds as resting in the soul leads us to realize ourselves and all life as of the soul, that, as we dwell not in past, present, or future, but in the eternal, we become more at one with the eternal. That as we view all organization, preservation, mutation as the work of the Divine One, we shall come more into harmony with the One, and thus remove the barrier in our path toward the light. In the second part of the first book, the problem of the emergence of the spiritual man is further dealt with. We are led to the consideration of the barriers to his emergence, of the overcoming of the barriers, and of certain steps and stages in the ascent from the ordinary consciousness of practical life to the finer, deeper, radiant consciousness of the spiritual man. 30. The barriers to interior consciousness which drive the psychic nature this way and that are these: sickness, inertia, doubt, light-mindedness, laziness, intemperance, false notions, inability to reach a stage of meditation or to hold it when reached. We must remember that we are considering the spiritual man as enwrapped and enmeshed by the psychic nature, the emotional and mental powers, and as unable to come to clear consciousness, unable to stand and see clearly, because of the psychic veils of the personality. 9 of these are enumerated, and they go pretty thoroughly into the brute toughness of the psychic nature. Sickness is included rather for its effect on the emotions and mind, since bodily infirmity, such as blindness or deafness, is no insuperable barrier to spiritual life, and may sometime be a help, as cutting off distractions. It will be well for us to ponder over each of these 9 activities, thinking of each as a psychic state, a barrier to the interior consciousness of the spiritual man. 31. Grieving, despondency, bodily restlessness, the drawing in and sending forth of the life breath also contribute to drive the psychic nature to and fro. The first 2 moods are easily understood. We can well see how a sodden psychic condition, flagrantly opposed to the pure and positive joy of spiritual life, would be a barrier. The next, bodily restlessness, is in a special way the fault of our day and generation. When it is conquered, mental restlessness will be half conquered too. The next 2 terms, concerning the life breath, offer some difficulty. The surface meaning is harsh and irregular breathing. The deeper meaning is a life of harsh and irregular impulses. 32. Steady application to a principle is the way to put a stop to these. The will, which in its pristine state was full of vigor, has been steadily corrupted by self-indulgence, the seeking of moods and sensations for sensations' sake. Hence come all the morbid and sickly moods of the mind. The remedy is a return to the pristine state of the will, by vigorous positive effort, or, as we are here told, by steady application to a principle. The principle to which we should thus steadily apply ourselves should be one arising from the reality of spiritual life, valorous work for the soul, in others as in ourselves. 33. By sympathy with the happy, compassion for the sorrowful, delight in the holy, disregard of the unholy, the psychic nature moves to gracious peace. When we are wrapped up in ourselves, shrouded with the cloak of our egotism, absorbed in our pains and bitter thoughts, we are not willing to disturb or strain our own sickly mood by giving kindly sympathy to the happy, thus doubling their joy, or by showing compassion for the sad, thus halving their sorrow. We refuse to find delight in holy things, and let the mind brood in sad pessimism on unholy things. All these evil psychic moods must be conquered by strong effort of will. This rending of the veils will reveal to us something of the grace and peace which are of the interior consciousness of the spiritual man. 34. Or peace may be reached by the even sending forth and control of the life breath. Here again we may look for a double meaning. First, that even and quiet breathing which is a part of the victory over bodily restlessness, then the even and quiet tenor of life, without harsh or dissonant impulses, which brings stillness to the heart. 35. Faithful, persistent application to any object, if completely attained, will bind the mind to steadiness. We are still considering how to overcome the wavering and perturbation of the psychic nature, which make it quite unfit to transmit the inward consciousness and stillness. We are once more told to use the will, and to train it by steady and persistent work, by sitting close to our work, in the phrase of the original. 36. As also will a joyful, radiant spirit. There is no such illusion as gloomy pessimism, and it has been truly said that a man's cheerfulness is the measure of his faith. Gloom, despondency, the pale cast of thought, are very amenable to the will. Sturdy and courageous effort will bring a clear and valorous mind, but it must always be remembered that it is not for solace to the personal man, but is rather an offering to the ideal of spiritual life, a contribution to the universal and universally shared treasure in heaven. 37. Or the purging of self-indulgence from the psychic nature. We must recognize that the fall of man is a reality, exemplified in our own persons. We have quite other sins than the animals, and far more deleterious. And they have all come through self-indulgence, with which our psychic natures are soaked through and through. As we climbed downhill for our pleasure, so we must climb up again for our purification and restoration to our former high estate. The process is painful, perhaps, yet indispensable. 38. Or a pondering on the perceptions gained in dreams and dreamless sleep. For the Eastern sages, dreams are, it is true, made up of images of waking life, reflection of what the eyes have seen and the ears heard. But dreams are something more, for the images are in a sense real, objective on their own plane, and the knowledge that there is another world, even a dream world, lightens the tyranny of material life. Much of the poetry and art is such a solace from dreamland. But there is more in dream, for it may image what is above as well as what is below, not only the children of men, but also the children by the shore of the immortal sea that brought us hither may throw their images on this magic mirror. So too of the secrets of dreamless sleep with its pure vision, in even greater degree. 39. Or meditative brooding on what is dearest to the heart. Here is a thought which our own day is beginning to grasp, that love is a form of knowledge, that we truly know anything or any person by becoming one therewith in love. Thus love has a wisdom that the mind cannot claim, and by this hearty love, this becoming one with what is beyond our personal borders, we may take a long step toward freedom. Two directions for this may be suggested: the pure love of the artist for his work, and the earnest, compassionate search into the hearts of others. 40. Thus he masters all, from the atom to the infinite. Newton was asked how he made his discoveries. By intending my mind on them, he replied. This steady pressure, this becoming one with what we seek to understand, whether it be atom or soul, is the one means to know. When we become a thing, we really know it, not otherwise. Therefore, live the life to know the doctrine, do the will of the Father, if you would know the Father. 41. When the perturbations of the psychic nature have all been stilled, then the consciousness, like a pure crystal, takes the color of what it rests on, whether that be the perceiver, perceiving, or the thing perceived. This is a fuller expression of the last sutra, and is so lucid that comment can hardly add to it. Everything is either perceiver, perceiving, or the thing perceived. or, as we might say, consciousness, force, or matter. The sage tells us that the one key will unlock the secrets of all three, the secrets of consciousness, force, and matter alike. The thought is that the cordial sympathy of a gentle heart, intuitively understanding the hearts of others, is really a manifestation of the same power as that penetrating perception whereby one divines the secrets of planetary motions or atomic structure. 42. When the consciousness, poised in perceiving, blends together the name, the object dwelt on, and the idea, this is perception with exterior consideration. In the first stage of the consideration of an external object, the perceiving mind comes to it preoccupied by the name and idea conventionally associated with that object. For example, in coming to the study of a book, we think of the author, his period, the school to which he belongs. The second stage, set forth in the next sutra, goes directly to the spiritual meaning of the book, setting its traditional trappings aside and finding its application to our own experience and problems. The commentator takes a very simple illustration, a cow, where one considers in the first stage the name of the cow, the animal itself, and the idea of a cow in the mind. In the second stage, one pushes these trappings aside, and, entering into the inmost being of the cow, shares its consciousness, as do some of the artists who paint cows. They get at the very life of what they study and paint. 43. When the object dwells in the mind, clear of memory pictures, uncolored by the mind, as a pure luminous idea, this is perception without exterior or consideration. We are still considered external visible objects. Such perception as is here described is of the nature of that penetrating vision whereby Newton, intending his mind in things, made his discoveries, or that whereby a really great portrait painter pierces to the soul of him whom he paints, and makes that soul live on canvas. These stages of perception are described in this way, to lead the mind up to an understanding of the piercing soul vision of the spiritual man, the immortal. 44. The same two steps, when referring to things of finer substance, are said to be with or without judicial action of the mind. We now come to mental or psychical objects, to images in the mind. It is precisely by comparing, arranging, superposing these mind images that we get our general notions or concepts. This process of analysis and synthesis, whereby we select certain qualities in a group of mind images, and then range together those of like quality, is the judicial action of the mind spoken of. But when we exercise swift divination upon the mind images, as does a poet or a man of genius, then we use a power higher than the judicial, and one nearer to the keen vision of the spiritual man. 45. Subtle substance rises in ascending degrees to that pure nature which has no distinguishing mark. As we ascend from outer material things, which are permeated by separateness, and whose chief characteristic is to be separate, just as so many pebbles are separate from each other, as we ascend first to mind images which overlap and coalesce in both space and time, and then to ideas and principles, we finally come to purer essences, drawing ever nearer and nearer to unity. Or we may illustrate this principle thus: our bodily external selves are quite distinct and separate in form, name, place, substance. Our mental selves, or finer substance, meet and part again, in perceptual concussion and interchange. Our spiritual selves attain true consciousness through unity, where the partition wall between us and the highest, between us and others, is broken down, and we are all made perfect in the One. The highest riches are possessed by all pure souls only when united. Thus we arise from separation to the true individuality in unity. 46. The above are the degrees of limited and conditional spiritual consciousness, still containing the seed of separateness. In the four stages of perception above described, the spiritual vision is still working through the mental and psychical. The inner genius is still expressed through the outer personal man. The spiritual man has yet to come completely to consciousness as himself in his own realm, the psychical veils laid aside. 47. When pure perception without judicial action of the mind is reached, there follows the gracious peace of the inner self. We have instanced certain types of this pure perception. The poet's divination, whereby he sees the spirit within the symbol, likeness in things unlike, and beauty in all things. The pure insight of the true philosopher, whose vision rests not on the appearances of life, but on its realities. Or the saint's firm perception of spiritual life and being. All these are far advanced on the way. They have drawn near to the secret dwelling of peace. 48. In that peace, perception is unfailingly true. The poet, the wise philosopher, and the saint not only reach a wide and luminous consciousness, but they gain certain knowledge of substantial reality. When we know that we know. For we have come to the stage where we know things by being them, and nothing can be more true than being. We rest on the rock, and know it to be rock, rooted in the very heart of the world. 49. The object of this perception is other than what is learned from the sacred books, or by sound inference, since this perception is particular. The distinction is a luminous and inspiring one. The scriptures teach general truths concerning universal spiritual life and broad laws, and inference from their teaching is not less general. But the spiritual perception of the awakened seer brings particular truth concerning his own particular life and needs, whether these be for himself or others. He receives defined, precise knowledge, exactly applying to what he has at heart. 50. The impress on the consciousness springing from this perception supersedes all previous impressions. Each state or field of the mind, each field of knowledge, so to speak, which is reached by mental and emotional energies, is a psychical state, just as the mind picture of a stage with the actors on it is a psychical state or field. When the pure vision, as of the poet, the philosopher, the saint, fills the whole field, all lesser views and visions are crowded out. The high consciousness displaces all lesser consciousness. Yet, in a certain sense, that which is viewed as part, even by the vision of a sage, has still an element of illusion, a thin psychical veil, however pure and luminous that veil may be. It is the last and highest psychic state. 51. When this impression ceases, then, since all impressions have ceased, there arises pure spiritual consciousness, with no seed of separateness left. The last psychic veil is drawn aside, and the spiritual man stands with unveiled vision, pure, serene. End of Chapter 2. Read for you by Chiquito Crasto, Birmingham, Alabama. The Need.
Chapter 3 of the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, translated by Charles Johnston. Chapter 3. Introduction to Book 2. The first book of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is called the Book of Spiritual Consciousness. The second book, which we now begin, is the Book of the Means of Soul Growth. And we must remember that soul growth here means the growth of the realization of the spiritual man, or To put the matter more briefly, the growth of the spiritual man, and the disentangling of the spiritual man from the wrappings, the veils, the disguises laid upon him by the mind and the psychical nature wherein he is enmeshed, like a bird caught in a net. The question arises, by what means may the spiritual man be freed from these psychical meshes and disguises, so that he may stand forth above death in his radiant eternalness and divine power? And the second book sets itself to answer this very question, and to detail the means in a way entirely practical and very lucid, so that he who runs may read, and he who reads may understand and practice. The second part of the second book is concerned with practical spiritual training, that is, with the earlier practical training of the spiritual man. The most striking thing in it is the emphasis laid on the commandments, which are precisely those of the latter part of the Decalogue, together with obedience to the Master. Our day and generation is far too prone to fancy that there can be mystical life and growth on some other foundation, on the foundation, for example, of intellectual curiosity or psychical selfishness. In reality, on this latter foundation, the life of the spiritual man can never be built, nor, indeed, anything but a psychic counterfeit, a dangerous delusion. Therefore, Patanjali, like every great spiritual teacher, meets the question, "What must I do to be saved?" with the age-old answer, "Keep the commandments." Only after the disciple can say, "These have I kept," can there be the further and finer teaching of the spiritual rules. It is therefore vital for us to realize that the Yoga system, like every true system of spiritual teaching, rests on this broad and firm foundation of honesty, truth, cleanness, obedience. Without these there is no salvation, and he who practices these, even though ignorant of spiritual things, is laying up treasure against the time to come. End of chapter 3.
Chapter 4 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Uday Sagar. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, translated by Charles Johnston. Book 2, from 1 to 28. Book 2. 1. The practices which make for union with the soul are fervent aspiration, spiritual reading, and complete obedience to the Master. The word which I have rendered fervent aspiration means primarily fire, and in the Eastern teaching it means the fire which gives life and light, and at the same time the fire which purifies. We have, therefore, as our first practice, as the first of the means of spiritual growth, that fiery quality of the will which enkindles and illumines, and at the same time the steady practice of purification, the burning away of all known impurities. Spiritual reading is so universally accepted and understood that it needs no comment. The very study of Patanjali's Sutras is an exercise in spiritual reading, and a very effective one. And so with all other books of the soul. Obedience to the Master means that we shall make the will of the Master our will, and shall conform in all wave to the will of the Divine, setting aside the wills of self, which are but psychic distortions of one divine will. The constant effort to obey in all the ways we know and understand will reveal new ways and new tasks, the evidence of new growth of the soul. Nothing will do more for the spiritual man in us than this, for there is no such regenerating power as the awakening spiritual will. 2. Their aim is to bring soul vision and to wear away hindrances. The aim of fervor, spiritual reading, and obedience to the Master is to bring soul vision and to wear away hindrances. Or, to use the phrases we have already adopted, the aim of these practices is to help the spiritual man to open his eyes, to help him also to throw aside the veils and disguises, the enmeshing psychic nets which surround him, tying his hands as it were and bandaging his eyes. And this, as all teachers testify, is a long and arduous task. a steady uphill fight demanding fine courage and persistent toil. Further, the fire of the spiritual will is, as we said, twofold. It illumines and so helps the spiritual man to see, and it also burns up the nets and meshes which ensnare the spiritual man. So with the other means, spiritual reading and obedience. Each in its action is twofold, wearing away the psychical and upbuilding the spiritual man. 3. These are the hindrances: the darkness of unwisdom, self-assertion, lust, hate, attachment. Let us try to translate this into terms of the psychical and spiritual man. The darkness of unwisdom is primarily the self-absorption of the psychical man, his complete preoccupation with his own hopes and fears, plans and purposes, sensations and desires, so that he fails to see or refuses to see that there is a spiritual man, and so doggedly resists all efforts of the spiritual man to cast off his psychic tyrant and set himself free. This is the real darkness, and all those who deny the immortality of the soul or deny the soul's existence and so lay out their lives wholly for the physical, mortal man and his ambitions are under this power of darkness. Born of this darkness, this psychic self-absorption is the dogged conviction that the psychic, personal man has separate, exclusive interests which he can follow for himself alone, and this conviction, when put into practice in our life, leads to contest with other personalities and so to hate. This hate again makes against the spiritual man, since it hinders the revelation of the high harmony between the spiritual man and his other selves, a harmony to be revealed only through the practice of love, that perfect love which casts out fear. In like manner, lust is the psychic man's craving for the stimulus of sensation, the din of which smothers the voice of the spiritual man, as in Shakespeare's phrase, the cackling geese would drown the song of the nightingale. And this craving for stimulus is a fruit of weakness, coming from the failure to find strength in the primal life of the spiritual man. Attachment is but another name for psychic self-absorption, for we are absorbed not in outward things, but rather in their images within our minds. Our inner eyes are fixed on them, our inner desire brood over them, and them we blind ourselves to the presence of the prisoner, the enmeshed and fettered spiritual man. 4. The darkness of unwisdom is the field of the others. These hindrances may be dormant, or worn thin, or suspended, or expanded. Here we have really two sutras in one. The first has been explained already. In the darkness of unwisdom grows the parasites, haste, lust, attachment. They are all outgrowths of the self-absorption of the psychical self. Next, we are told that these barriers may be either dormant, or suspended, or expanded, or worn thin. Faults which are dormant will be brought out through the pressure of life, or through the pressure of strong aspiration. Thus expanded, they must be fought and conquered, or, as Patanjali quaintly says, they must be worn thin, as a wheel might, or the links of manacles. 5. The darkness of ignorance is holding that which is unenduring, impure, full of pain, not the soul, to be eternal, pure, full of joy, the soul. This we have really considered already. The psychic man is unenduring, impure, full of pain, not the soul, not the real self. The spiritual man is enduring, pure, full of joy, the real self. The darkness of unwisdom is, therefore, the self-absorption of the psychical personal man to the exclusion of the spiritual man. It is the belief carried into action that the personal man is the real man, the man for whom we should toil, for whom we should build, for whom we should live. This is that psychical man of whom it is said, "He that soweth to the flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption." 6. Self-assertion comes from thinking of the seer and the instrument of vision as forming oneself. This is the fundamental idea of the Sankhya philosophy, of which the yoga is avowedly the practical side. To translate this into our terms, we may say that the seer is a spiritual man, the instrument of vision is the psychical man, through which the spiritual man gains experience of the outer world, but we turn the servant into the master. We attribute to the psychical man the personal self, a reality which really belongs to the spiritual man alone. And so, thinking of the quality of the spiritual man as belonging to the psychical, we merge the spiritual man in the psychical, or as the text says, we think of the two as forming oneself. 7. Lust is the resting in the sense of enjoyment. This has been explained again and again. Sensation, as for example, the sense of taste, is meant to be the guide to action. In this case, the choice of wholesome food and the avoidance of poisonous and hurtful things. But if we rest in the sense of taste as the pleasure in itself, rest, that is, in the psychical side of taste, we fall into gluttony and live to eat instead of eating to live. So, with the other great organic power, the power of reproduction, this lust comes into being through resting in the sensation and looking for pleasure from that. 8. Hate is a resting in the sense of pain. Pain comes, for the most part, from the strife of personalities, the jarring discords between psychic selves, each of which deems itself supreme. A dwelling on this pain breeds hate, which tears the warring selves yet further asunder, and puts new enmity between them, thus hindering the harmony of the real, the reconciliation through the soul. 9. Attachment is the desire toward life, even in the wise, carried forward by its own energy. The life here desired is the psychic life, the intensely vibrating life of the psychic self. This prevails even in those who have attained much wisdom, so long as it fails short of the wisdom of complete renunciation, complete obedience to each least behest of the spiritual man, and of the master who guards and aids the spiritual man. The desire of sensation, the desire of psychic life, reproduces itself, carried on by its own energy and momentum, and hence comes the circle of death and rebirth, instead of the liberation of the spiritual man. 10. These hindrances, when they have become subtle, are to be removed by a counter current. The darkness of unwisdom is to be removed by the light of wisdom, pursued through fervor, spiritual reading of holy teachings, and of life itself, and by obedience to the Master. Lust is to be removed by pure aspiration of spiritual life, which, bringing true strength and stability, takes away the void of weakness which we try to fill by the stimulus of sensations. Hate is to be overcome by love. The fear that arises through the sense of separate, warring selves is to be stilled by the realization of the one self, the one soul in all. This realization is the perfect love that casts out fear. The hindrances are said to have become subtle when, by initial efforts, they have been located and recognized in the psychic nature. 11. Their active turnings are to be removed by meditation. Here is, in truth, the whole secret of yoga, the science of the soul. The active turnings, the strident vibrations of selfishness, lust, and hate are to be stilled by meditation, by letting heart and mind dwell in spiritual life, by lifting up the heart to the strong, silent life above, which rests in the stillness of eternal love and needs no harsh vibration to convince it of true being. 12. The burden of bondage to sorrow has its root in these hindrances. It will be felt in this life or in a life not yet manifested. The burden of bondage to sorrow has its root in the darkness of unwisdom, in selfishness, in lust, in hate, in attachment to sensation. All these are, in the last analysis, absorption in the psychical self, and this means sorrow because it means the sense of separateness, and this means jarring discord and inevitable death. But the psychical self will breed a new physical self in a new birth, and sow new sorrows in a life not yet manifest. 13. From this root they grow and ripen the fruits of birth, of the lifespan, of all that is tasted in life. Fully to comment on this would be to write a treatise on karma and its practical working in detail, whereby the place and time of the next birth, its content and duration, are determined, and to do this the present commentator is in no wise fitted. But this much is clearly understood, that through a kind of spiritual gravitation, the incarnating self is drawn to a home and life cycle which will give it scope and discipline, and its need of discipline is clearly conditioned by its character, its standing, its accomplishment. 14. These bear fruits of rejoicing or of affliction as they are sprung from holy or unholy works. Since holiness is obedience to divine law, to the law of divine harmony, and obedience to harmony strengthens that harmony in the soul, which is the one true joy. Therefore, joy comes of holiness, comes indeed in no other way. And as unholiness is disobedience, and therefore discord, therefore unholiness makes for pain. And this twofold law is true, whether the cause takes effect in this or in a yet unmanifested birth. 15. To him who possesses discernment, all personal life is misery, because it ever waxes and wanes, is ever afflicted with restlessness, makes ever new dynamic impresses in the mind, and because all its activities war with each other. The whole life of the psychic self is misery, because it ever waxes and wanes, because birth brings inevitable death, because there is no expectation without its shadow, fear. The life of the psychic self is misery, because it is afflicted with restlessness, so that he who has much finds not satisfaction, but rather the whetted hunger for more. The fire is not quenched by pouring oil on it, so desire is not quenched by the satisfaction of desire. Again, the life of the psychic self is misery, because it makes ever new dynamic impresses in the mind, because a desire satisfied is but the seed from which springs the desire to find like satisfaction again. The appetite comes in eating, as the proverb says, and grows by what it feeds on. And the psychic self, torn with conflicting desires, is ever the house divided against itself, which must surely fall. 16. This pain is to be warded off before it has come. In other words, we cannot cure the pains of life by laying on them any balm. We must cut the root, absorption in the psychical self. So it is said, there is no cure for the misery of longing, but to fix the heart upon the eternal. 17. The cause of what is to be warded off is the absorption of the seer in the things seen. Here again we have the fundamental idea of the Sankhya, which is the intellectual counterpart of the Yoga system. The cause of what is to be warded off, the root of misery, is the absorption of consciousness in the psychical man, and the things which beguile the psychical man. The cure is liberation. 18. Things seen have as a property manifestation, action, inertia. They form the basis of the elements and the sense powers. They make for experience and for liberation. Here is the whole philosophy of life. Things seen, the total of the phenomena, possess as their property manifestation, action, inertia, the qualities of force and matter in combination. These, in their grosser form, make the material world. In their finer, more subjective form, they make the psychical world, the world of sense impressions and mind images. And through this totality of the phenomenal, the soul gains experience and is prepared for liberation. In other words, the whole outer world exists for the purposes of the soul, and finds in this its true reason for being. 19. The grades or layers of the three potencies are the defined, the undefined, that with distinctive mark, that without distinctive mark. Or, as we might say, there are two strata of the physical and two strata of the physical realms. In each there is a side of form and the side of force. The form side of the physical is here called the defined. The force side of the physical is the undefined, that which has no boundaries. So in the physical there is the form side, that with distinctive marks, such as the characteristic features of mind images, and there is the force side, without distinctive marks, such as the forces of desire or fear, which may flow now to this mind image, now to that. 20. The seer is pure vision. Though pure, he looks out through the vesture of the mind. The seer, as always, is a spiritual man, whose deepest consciousness is pure vision, the pure life of the eternal. But the spiritual man, as yet unseeing in his proper person, looks out on the world through the eyes of the psychical man, by whom he is enfolded and enmeshed. The task is to set this prisoner free, to clear the dust of ages from this buried temple. 21. The very essence of things seen is that they exist for the seer. The things of outer life, not only material things, but the psychic man also, exist in very deed for the purpose of the seer, the soul. The spiritual man disaster comes when the psychical man sets up, so to speak, on his own account, trying to live for himself alone, and taking material things to solace his loneliness. 22. Though fallen away from him who has reached the goal, things seen have not all too fallen away, since they still exist for others. When one of us conquers hate, hate does not thereby cease out of the world, since others still hate and suffer hatred. So with other delusions, which hold us in bondage to material things, and through which we look at all material things. When the colored veil of illusion is gone, the world which we saw through it is also gone, for now we see life as it is, in the white radiance of eternity. But for others the colored veil remains, and therefore the world thus colored by it remains for them, and will remain till they too conquer delusion. 23. The association of the seer with things seen is the cause of the realizing of the nature of things seen, and also of the realizing of the nature of the seer. Life is educative. All life's infinite variety is for discipline, for the development of the soul. So, passing through many lives, the soul learns the secrets of the world, the august laws that are written in the form of snow crystal, or the majestic order of the stars. Yet all these laws are but reflections, but projections outward, of the laws of the soul. Therefore, in learning these, the soul learns to know itself. All life is but the mirror wherein the soul learns to know its own face. 24. The cause of this association is the darkness of unwisdom. The darkness of unwisdom is the absorption of consciousness in the personal life and in the things seen by the personal life. This is the fall through which comes experience, the learning of the lessons of life. When they are learned, the day of redemption is at hand. 25. The bringing of this association to an end by bringing the darkness of unwisdom to an end is the great liberation. This is the seer's attainment of his own pure being. When the spiritual man has, through the psychical, learned all life's lessons, the time has come for him to put off the veil and disguise of the psychical and to stand revealed a king in the house of the Father. So shall he enter into his kingdom and go no more out. 26. A discerning which is carried on without wavering is the means of liberation. Here we come closer to the pure Vedanta, with its discernment between the eternal and the temporal. St. Paul, after following Philo and Plato, lays down the same fundamental principle: the things seen are temporal, the things unseen are eternal. Patanjali means something more than an intellectual assent, though this too is vital. He has in view a constant discriminating in act as well as thought of the two ways which present themselves for every deed or choice, always to choose the higher way, that which makes for the things eternal, honesty rather than roguery, courage and not cowardice, the things of another rather than one's own, sacrifice and not indulgence. This true discernment, carried out constantly, makes for liberation. 27. His illuminations is sevenfold, rising in successive stages. Patanjali's text does not tell us when the 7 stages of this illumination are. The commentator thus describes them. First, the danger to be escaped is recognized. It need not be recognized a second time. Second, the causes of the danger to be escaped are worn away. They need not be worn away a second time. Third, the way of escape is clearly perceived by the contemplation which checks psychic perturbation. Fourth, the means of escape, clear discernment, has been developed. This is the fourfold release belonging to insight. The final release from the psychic is threefold. As fifth of the 7 degrees, the dominance of its thinking is ended. As sixth, its potencies, like rocks from a precipice, fall off themselves. Once dissolved, they do not grow again. Then, as seventh, freed from these potencies, the spiritual man stands forth in his own nature as purity and light. Happy is the spiritual man who beholds this sevenfold illumination in its ascending stages. 28. From steadfastly following after the means of yoga until impurity is worn away, there comes the illumination of thought up to full discernment. Here we enter on the more detailed practical teaching of Patanjali with its sound and luminous good sense. And when we come to detail the means of yoga, we may well be astonished at their simplicity. There is little in them that is mysterious. They are very familiar. The essence of the matter lies in carrying them out. End of Book 2 from 1 to 28. Recording by Uday Sagar. Chapter 5 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Uday Sagar. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Translated by Charles Johnston. Book 2 from 29th to the end. 29. The 8 means of yoga are the commandments, the rules, right poise, right control of the life force, withdrawal, attention, meditation, contemplation. These 8 means are to be followed in their order, in the sense which will immediately be made clear. We can get a ready understanding of the first 2 by comparing them with the commandments which must be obeyed by all good citizens and the rules which are laid on the members of religious orders. Until one has fulfilled the first, it is futile to concern oneself with the second, and so with all the means of yoga. They must be taken in their order. 30. The commandments are these: non-injury, truthfulness, abstaining from stealing, from impurity, from covetousness. These 5 precepts are almost exactly the same as the Buddhist commandments: not to kill, not to steal, not to be guilty of incontinence, not to drink intoxicants, to speak the truth. Almost identical is St. Paul's list: thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet. And in the same spirit is the answer made to the young man, having great possessions, who asked, "What shall I do to be saved?" and received the reply, "Keep the commandments." This broad, general training which forms and develops human character must be accomplished at a very considerable degree before there can be much hope of success in the further stages of spiritual life. First the psychical and then the spiritual, first the man, then the angel. On this broad, humane and wise foundation does the system of Patanjali rest. 31. The commandments, not limited to any race, place, time or occasion, universal, are the great obligation. The commandments form the broad general training of humanity. Each one of them rests on a universal spiritual law. Each one of them expresses an attribute or aspect of the self, the eternal. When we violate one of the commandments, we set ourselves against the law and being of the eternal, thereby bringing ourselves to inevitable confusion. So the first steps in spiritual life must be taken by bringing ourselves into voluntary obedience to these spiritual laws, and thus making ourselves partakers of the spiritual powers. The being of the eternal, like the law of gravity, the need of air to breathe, these great laws know no exceptions. They are in force in all lands, throughout all times, for all mankind. 32. The rules are these: purity, serenity, fervent aspiration, spiritual reading, and perfect obedience to the Master. Here we have a finer law, one which humanity as a whole is less ready for, less fit to obey. Yet we can see that these rules are in the same in a sense as the commandments, but on a higher, more spiritual plane. The commandments may be obeyed in outer acts and abstinences. The rules demand obedience of the heart and spirit, a far more awakened and more positive consciousness. The rules are the spiritual counterpart of the commandments, and they have finer degrees for more advanced spiritual growth. 33. When transgressions hinder, the weight of the imagination should be thrown on the opposite side. Let us take a simple case, that of a thief, a habitual criminal, who has drifted into stealing in childhood, before the moral consciousness has awakened. We may imprison such a thief and deprive him of all possibility of further theft, or of using the divine gift of will, or we may recognize his disadvantages and help him gradually to build up possessions which express his will and draw forth his self-respect. If we imagine that after he has built well and his possessions have become dear to him, he himself is robbed, then we can see how he would come vividly to realize the essence of theft and of honesty, and would cleave to honest dealings with firm conviction. In some such way does the great law teach us. Our sorrows and losses teach us the pain of the sorrow and loss we inflict on others, and so we cease to inflict them. Now, as to the more direct application. To conquer a sin, let heart and mind rest not on the sin but on the contrary virtue. Let the sin be forced out by positive growth in the true direction, not by direction opposition. Turn away from the sin and go forward courageously, constructively, creatively in well-doing. In this way, the whole nature will gradually be drawn up to the higher level, on which the sin does not even exist. The conquest of a sin is a matter of growth and evolution rather than of opposition. 34. Transgressions are injury, falsehood, theft, incontinence, envy, whether committed or caused, or assented to through greed, wrath, or infatuation, whether faint or middling or excessive, bearing endless fruit of ignorance and pain. Therefore must the weight be cast on the other side. Here are the causes of sin, greed, wrath, infatuation, with their effects, ignorance and pain. The causes are to be cured by better wisdom, by a truer understanding of the self, of life. For greed cannot endure before the realization that the whole world belongs to the self, which self we are, nor can we hold wrath against one who is one with the self, and therefore with ourselves, nor can infatuation, which is the seeking for the happiness of the all in some limited part of it, survive the knowledge that we are the heirs of the all. Therefore let thought and imagination, mind and heart, throw their weight on the other side, the side not of the world but of the self. 35. Where non-injury is perfected, all enmity ceases in the presence of him who possesses it. We come now to the spiritual powers which result from keeping the commandments, from the obedience to spiritual law which is the keeping the commandments, where the heart is full of kindness, which seeks no injury to another, either in act or thought or wish. This full love creates an atmosphere of harmony, whose benign power touches with healing all who come within its influence. Peace in the heart radiates peace.